what is in there? I go, a bear. You shot that bear with that 22? And I'm like, no, it's a 30-06. And he was kind of limping. And I said, what'd you do? Hurt yourself? And he goes, yeah, I sprung something. And I said, well, come with me. Because I knew he was going to walk all the way to the trailhead. And it was on the Northfield Lake Placid Trail. And it's at the trailhead is actually the end of the Northfield Lake Placid Trail. And from that Moose Pond lean-to to that thing, I mean, you can look it up, but it's 6 or 8 miles.
Welcome back to another episode of Northwoods Whitetails podcast. I'm your host, Joey Davis. I'm joined by co-host Brent Dragon, and today's guest is Mike Berry. Mike is a well-renowned auto racing driver through the state of Vermont. He is a backcountry fanatic. He takes backcountry camping to a next level. He's hunted all over New England. He primarily hunts the Adirondacks, and you'll hear his take on it, what he does, how he goes about doing things. It's a very insightful podcast. He gives a lot of tips to those that are interested in doing it. We're going to dive right into this thing, so here we go.
I've been a Vermonter my whole life. I really enjoyed the outdoors. I, for whatever reason, I was never afraid of getting lost or anything like that. So we grew up in Colchester, but every weekend and every moment I had, I would find a way to get to my grandparents who lived in Belvedere. And at the time, Belvedere was like the mecca for forever wild. I mean, it was big mountains, it was big woods, big deer. So I spent and grew up there. Loved it, had no problem being alone. And like I said, wasn't afraid of the woods, wasn't afraid of getting lost. And that was before GPSs, cell phones. I mean, I don't even think for a long time I carried a map. I mean, I would leave in the dark as a kid and come out in a town, ask them where I was. They would point me to a payphone at that time. I'd call my grandmother. She'd go, where are you? And quite frankly, I'd hand the phone to wherever I was, whether it was a bar or a store or a gas station. They would tell her where I was. She'd swing up, pick me up, and home we would go. So that's kind of how I got started in hunting. And as years went by, it helped me hunting in the Adirondacks. Because back then, Belvedere, Eden, that area is a lot like the Adirondacks, but the Adirondacks would be on steroids. We're up there. If you went over a mountain down in the valley, you'd come to a town or a road. In the Adirondacks, that's just not the case. But it was very similar terrain-wise. And it was very similar with the way the deer and the bigger bucks lived. And during the day, they would be right on the tops of the mountains in those really thick areas. Which that's changed now because of the moose. But anyways, you could pretty much guarantee that if you were willing to put in the effort, get up, go in the dark, hike to the top of the mountain, you could almost guarantee you would be amongst some decent deer. At night, those deer would come down into the hardwoods, into the meadows, into whatever. There weren't many meadows, but the ones they were. And they'd make all kinds of tracks, and that's where most of the hunters stayed. They would stay down there. Either they really believed the deer were there or they just didn't want to put the effort forth into, climbing up the mountains. And then I started hunting the Adirondacks because that area was getting, I don't want to say over-hunted, but for my liking, it was over-hunted and I needed another challenge. So I started hunting in the Adirondacks. But the only difference there was you couldn't get up and hike in the morning and then hike out at night because you spent all your time hiking. So being somewhat lazy and at the point not really liking the early mornings, I said, why don't I just go back in here and stay? So that's what I did. I would grab a backpack, a sleeping bag, and my rifle, and I would leave the truck usually in the early afternoon, hiking in the dark because, like I said earlier, there's nothing else to do but hike. It's cooler and the hills aren't as intimidating in the dark. And I would get within a couple 100 yards of where I thought the deer were, throw down my sleeping bag, and if I had a rain poncho, string it over the top of it, and then I would just hunt out of there. And again, the only problem with that is that's a 3 or 4 day venture. After that, you're physically and mentally spent. And you have to save a little in reserve because you have to get out of there. So, and it worked like a charm, because in the high peaks regions of the Adirondacks, the bucks did exactly what I was accustomed to them to do. You know, they'd come down in the hardwoods at night, chase doe, fight, eat, and then before light, they would be back up in the very tops, which some days it would just blow your mind because there would be bare ground and plenty of feed down low, and it would be as much as a foot of snow on the very top, but they would still go there, irregardless.
That's where safety was.
That's where safety was. And what I found is there's a transition area between where the hardwoods turn into the softwoods. And it's probably, it depends on where you are, but it could be from 50 yards to 150 yards wide. And that's where I spent 90% of my time.
Just a mix of forest.
Softwood. And what I would do, a typical day, I'd get there, spend the night, get up in the morning, usually at light, because at that point you had been in your sleeping bag from 12 to 13 hours. Because on a typical day, if you got back to your sleeping bag at dark, that was 5 o'clock. And you couldn't expect daylight again till probably 6 in the morning. And with the shelter you had, you literally had to get in your sleeping bag or you were going to freeze. So you would eat whatever it was you brought, and then you would lay there for 12, 13 hours. So you were happy to get out of there as soon as light broke. And what I would do is I would start walking that band of terrain. And hopefully if there was snow, I would find a track. Usually in the morning, the tracks were always heading up. And if that was the situation, I knew I had roughly an hour to 2 hours to kill that deer on his feet. After that, he was going to be laying down. He still could be killed, but you had to employ a little different tactic. Then you had to swing around him, get up behind him, and come up over the other side, and then try to pick him out of that nasty softwood. And that's how I deployed using binoculars. I mean, I used them all the time. In the evening, it was just the reverse. It was a little harder in the evenings to hunt because say you had no luck that morning and you got back to your sleeping or you were heading back and you were picked up a track coming out of the softwood heading through that band down into the hardwood. Then you had to make a decision of how tired were you?
What you do down, you got to do back up.
Right. But your odds of killing the deer were better in the afternoon than in the morning because now you had the high ground. And if you could time it so that you could get above them while they were in the hardwoods, but that was usually only about a half an hour, 40 minutes. Now that duration of time got bigger as the season wore on. But as the season wore on, it got snowier and colder. And if you think it's bad down at the road, it's really bad up there. So the mental fatigue set in a little bit quicker. But if you could catch them, I mean, if you got lucky and you were walking through that terrain, paralleling that elevation on the mountain, and you picked up a track of a buck coming out of his bed, heading down in there, and you would have to walk fast. Now it wasn't sneak. You got on that deer and you just took off after it. Now the downside to that is if you're walking fast, you're covering a lot of ground. And like you said earlier, that ground has to be recovered. And that's uphill at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. It's not like the old days where, at the end of the day, you're at 3,000 feet and your truck's at 1,000 feet. Man, that's all downhill. Mm-hmm. But now it's the other way around. And you're racing dark. it's got easier with GPS because you could find your tent, and if there was snow, you could always find it. But if there was bare ground, I can literally remember days where in the back of your neck, the hair would stand up because you're like, shoot, I'm not 1,000% sure I'm going to find this thing. It always worked out, but that worked like a charm. That literally worked like a charm. And I've been back in there hunting with guys, and I always would tell them that I could find them almost whenever I wanted because they would always be in the hardwoods. Because it's easy to get tricked into hunting the hardwoods because that's where all the tracks are, and that's where you can see. And most of the hunters I ever encountered were always sitting in areas where they could see a long ways. And I would just shake my head going, yeah, that's nice. If you're a photographer, you're right in the right spot. But even way, way back in there, you would think that they wouldn't be nocturnal. You would think if they didn't get harassed, why are they still so skittish? I've come up with two reasons, and one is they have been hunting in the past. I mean, years ago. But I've discovered that the doe that doesn't want to get harassed will find the thickest, gnarliest place they can find to escape the bucks. And the bucks have figured it out. So they will go and search them out. And I've only discovered that because I follow these bucks. And I would say, oh my God, what are you doing? You know what I mean? I mean, give me a break, find some easier walking. And eventually they would stumble on a doe, which was good and bad too, because normally if they were with a doe, you probably weren't going to kill them because the doe would bust you far quicker than the buck. Unless it was that perfect timing. If you all just met at that 15-minute where they were still running around and still had some energy. But if they were laying down, if there was a buck laying down with a doe, forget it. Now, I've shot bucks laying down by themselves in that thick stuff, but I have never, ever shot one that had located a doe. Well, actually, that's not true. The last one I just shot just happened to be with another buck and a doe, but that was just a freak coincidence. It was pouring rain. I just was going up this mountain, keep going and going and going, and I was like, well, what are you doing? And then just as I got to the top, I'm like, well, if I put all this effort in, I should at least come over the top with the wind in my face, which meant I had to walk all the way around it. And I just happened to pop up over, and I just happened to stumble right on them. And they just, with the rain being the way it was, it just completely caught them off guard with the wind in my face. And when the three of them stood up, the one buck took straight off. The doe stood still, which forced the other buck to stay still, which was the only thing that led to his demise. Mm-hmm. But that one was in the northern region where the tops of the mountains, you can see better. But the high peaks regions,
just covered in spruce.
Yeah, it's just a tanglement of
dead wood.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you have to be super, super careful because over there, if you bump one of those off the top and they go down the other side, you're never going to see them again. Mm-hmm. That's why you want to always come in and bump them back down in the valley you're in, because unlike Vermont, they have multiple valleys they can choose. That's why and I've tried it. One year I hiked in, Jennifer and I hiked in with a cart, and it took us 2 days, set up a nice tent with a little wood stove. It worked, but only for 1 year. After that,
Really?
They wanted nothing to do with that valley after that. And I tried. And even that, we hiked in that 1 year. That was the only year I've spent 9 days. Well, 1 year I spent 44 nights in the woods in 1 year.
And we should mention, you're not sleeping in a tent.
Well, that particular time I was, but most of the time, the most effective way is a internal pack, a sleeping bag with a Gore-Tex bivvy, and a rain poncho. And it's just, travel light, travel deep. And there again, and with this setup, you're moving constantly. with the one time I brought the tent in and tried to make it a little more comfortable, that was the year I hunted 9 days. And of those 9 days, 7 of them I never saw deer. And what I would do is I would get up in the morning about 4 o'clock and I'd open the flap of the tent. And if there was snow on the ground, I was gone. If there wasn't, I'd spend another hour, getting ready. And then I would do that quadrant thing, go out and pick an area and scout the living, out of it. And then that 7th or 8th day, I don't remember now what it was, I woke up, I opened the tent and there was snow. And by 9 o'clock, there was a deer on the ground because I just took off because I knew there was a scrape line. I knew where I wanted to go. And I had at least one opportunity to be distracted because I picked up another track and I said, no, stick to the plan, dummy. And I come up over a little rise and I look down and that scrape was jet black. And after that, it was probably 20 minutes. But I ended up shooting him 3 times.
Was he on his feet still? Or
Well,
was
the
he
third
bedded?
time he was still on his feet because he had run right into a blowdown. It was almost like a shooting carnival. I mean, I was following the track, but he was a little off to the right, and I saw him, and he went behind a spruce tree. He came out behind a spruce tree. I shot. And then he ran right around in front of me and stopped again. I shot again. Then he ran around here and stopped, and I shot again. Well, that third time, he had run right into the top end of a blowdown. So he was literally upright, but dead. And I only carried 3 bullets. So at that point, I was like, what are you going to do? So
Stab him.
as it turned out, he and it's actually that one right there, the kind of the little white, that one right there. Yeah.
We got long beams on him.
Yeah.
He's a good buck.
So then that's when the work starts. So you start skinning.
You'd pack them all out.
Not all of them. You take the hind, everything's deboned. I never took any of the front shoulders because with any luck, there was a hole in it. Same with the ribs and all that. They were pretty much shot up because I can't see blood. So even though I use a pump and I only carry 3 bullets, if I see them and they're still moving, I have to shoot because on bare ground, I can't track them. Mm-hmm. So I have to get them on the ground as fast as I can.
So 3 bullets.
Right.
Why only 3?
Because you can load and reload faster with only 3. I found that those last 2 bullets in the clip on those pumps are under more pressure and they come out of the clips harder. So I like only the last 2 because the pressure of the spring in the clip doesn't pinch them against the bottom of the clip as hard.
Number 4 is Hale, and number 5 is Mary, usually.
Well, yeah, and after 3, quite frankly, you're lucky to get 3.
Yeah.
So and if I'm usually shooting more than 3, it's because it's an animal that's thrashing, and I can't afford to let him get back up. So they usually get somewhat perforated at that point. Mm-hmm. And then, a lot of times, of course, you got the cape, but I use the cape as a container for the meat. And I take it up as high as I could on the head, and I use the cape, and then I put the meat in it, and then I wrap it up, any excess meat, and then the rest goes, in the pack, and you tear it out. I leave probably more behind than most for 2 reasons. One, I'm probably at my physical limits, and 2, I have this, I don't want to call it a ritual, and I'm certainly no goody two-shoes, but I'd like to leave something behind. These deer back in there are usually dying of old age. And if you've ever killed a deer back in there and gone back to the site a week later, you can't even tell there's anything there. The hairs are consumed by the birds, the mice, the animal. I shot a deer once. It wasn't too far from my backpack. I was going to be cute. I got it out. I bent a couple-inch sapling over and tied it, and I was going to let the spring of the sapling lift it up. Yeah, right. It lifts their head and maybe a quarter of their front shoulders, but you're not physically strong enough to bend a tree over that'll actually propel a deer off the ground. Maybe somebody can, but I can't. Well, I left it, and I came back the next morning, and the snow around this thing was so packed down, and it was in a little sheltered sprucey area. When I walked in there, I felt like I was like everybody. There was eyeballs everywhere just staring at, because pieces were scattered, and I mean, nothing goes to waste.
Everything's recycled.
Everything gets used. And I get a kick out of some people that are, well, you're wasting a deer. I'm like, dude, the only waste is right here. Mm-hmm. This is waste. These heads right here, I mean, those antlers, if that deer had died on his naturally in the woods, those antlers wouldn't be with us today. Mm-hmm. Rodents would have, well, you can see some of them I found, they're all chewed up. So this is the only way. So, and most Adirondack high peaks bucks aren't that big. I mean, if I've shot 200 pounders in Vermont, a couple of them in Ontario, probably more in Ontario. And I can honestly say if I had one that went over 200, it would have been that one right there. And I wouldn't bet my life on it.
You think most of them, I mean, in your opinion, what do most of them weigh over there? Like the 170?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, a really good one like those two, yeah. Those are probably $180. I've seen some 140s and 60s with big racks that have been shot over there. And you can tell an Adirondack buck because it'll have really narrow hips in the rear. Because of the terrain, the feed, the rocks. No, they're not many.
What are a lot of those deer feeding on over there?
Less and less every year.
Yeah, there's hardly any logging, right?
Right. And that was another reason I was migrating toward the northern section, because there's overlogging in some areas there. They just, they clear cut it basically. But no, the Adirondack buck they travel a long ways. Yeah, and that's a combination of two reasons: wintering areas, but that northern region, I can't even imagine how many tons of feed that those deer get every year. You go over by, well, just south of St. Regis, the Deer Valley restaurant, and just what they feed them, and that's the tip of the iceberg. Those hunting camps and clubs through there, I mean, they have silos. Really? Where they back under and dump into their ATVs and take out and dump in the ground. So, and those deer all migrate right there.
Yeah.
There's another guy that does a lot of good high peak, and that's Kenny Petrie. And we've been comparing photos from cameras. And there was one particular buck that got killed, not by me, was just a giant 8-pointer. I had him 2 years on camera, way back in. And then he just disappeared. I ended up seeing him last year on a photo that a guy shot him. And I know where the guy shot him. I know where Kenny Petrie was getting him on his camera. And I know where I was getting him on my camera. And I'm telling you, it was a long ways apart. And the only reason you could tell, he had a little sticker on his G2. So he was easily identifiable. And he got shot not that far from the road, unfortunately.
No kidding.
Right? There's a pond called... And it kind of makes a little turn down in there, and the guy was going down in there. And I think I probably, unfortunately, contributed to his demise, because where I was, I think I got him stirred up and moved him out. I don't think I so much moved him as I moved the doe. Mm-hmm. And I'm afraid that probably didn't help.
Put him where he shouldn't have been.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, that's why you got to be careful when they say they're hunting in the Adirondacks, because like I said, there are 4 different regions. But the high peaks is, I think, the hardest. Physically, I think it's the easiest to kill a deer if you employ these tactics. Because you can almost guarantee where they're going to be bedding. Now, does that mean it's a 1 acre parcel? No. It's many acres. But if you get a little snow and you walk that transition area, and there's a huge advantage to sleeping in the woods. Your whole body becomes in tuned like it isn't when you step out of your truck in the morning. Because I've done both. I've gone to Maine, I've tracked, I've gone to Ontario. I mean, we've hunted Alaska, on Gala Bay, Northwest Montana. It's just not the same. You're after about the third day, you'll even start to notice it. The things you hear, smell, and you see is different than it would be if you just jumped out of your truck and took off after a deer. You really, it sounds corny, but you kind of get in tune with what's around you. You know, if you're in there that many, and there again, it's like a lottery. I mean, if you're in there that many hours, even if you're incompetent, you're going to stumble onto something. You know, even if your gun goes off, you're going to kill something after, 24 hours in the woods. And another thing, the education, even sleeping in the woods at night is interesting because I've literally smelt bucks going by at night. You know, that's musty smell. And of course you hear deer a lot. I mean, most of the time they're deer. There may be an occasional, raccoon there are probably not many raccoons back there, but.
Ever have any incidences with bears or anything like that? Usually they hibernated at that point.
No, I've been in areas where there are a lot of bears. Thought I was going to shoot a nice buck one day. I was watching a doe. It was bare ground. I heard this thing coming up the mountain. I'm like, oh, here we go, And it was a big old bear. And the bear stopped. He was coming right for me. Not that he was after me, but he was coming for me. And he stopped. And he looked over at that doe and took right off and chased her right out of there. But it was a year where the beech nuts were absolutely everywhere. I mean, it looked like vacuum cleaners were going through the leaves. There was so much bear activity. And one day I saw 3 bear. Well, that particular bear, that was a really, really big bear. I shot that, it would have been my second night in the woods. And I didn't want to shoot him. I had that little pump the first day I ever hunted with it, and it had only been bore-sighted. And I was going in scouting, and I hiked quite a ways back in, spent the night, got up the next day, and I was just on a mission. I had been following a buck a year or so earlier, and he had gone through this mountain valley, went down over the other side, and I found this massive chain hanging in a tree. And not that far from it was one of those logging pieces of equipment. I don't know if you've ever seen them. They got a bunch of pulleys. They're on a sled, and they use them to slow the load of logs down a steep mountain. There was one of those on the ground. And I had left the buck right there because I was afraid I couldn't make it back through the pass. There again, no GPS, no map, and I had to backtrack in the snow. So I left the deer and, worked my way back through. Well, actually, it was the day I shot that one, same day. So I headed to that thing, and it was just getting about 4:00. And I looked to my left, and there was a little creek, and this thing was coming head down right straight for me. And I'm like, shit. And there was this little creek between us. Well, when we went down the creek, he disappeared. But I knew he was still on that same trajectory. And I said, when he comes out of that creek, he's going to be like right on top of me. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I thought about it for a minute, and I didn't really know what he would do if I spooked him being that close to me within his, personal space. So I said, well, I hope the boar sighting was good. So he come up out of that creek, and I'm telling you, he was not very far away. And I just his head was down, and I shot him right in the back of the thing, and he never even moved. He just went boom right there. I was like, okay, now what? Well, actually, I think there's a photo right there of him. He's an absolute giant. So I started skinning him, and I said, well, then it got dark. I spent the night with him, got up the next morning, finished skinning him, made 2 mistakes. I didn't bring the skull out, which was a huge mistake, although I don't know if I would have been able to carry it, because I had to lay the bear out on a big rock and actually deflesh it in order to get it to a weight that was manageable. And I had nothing for food or clothes or anything. And I was on the other side of this mountain range. And I knew I couldn't get back up over that mountain range back to, my truck and stuff, which would still been 2 days. So I made a decision. I looked on the map, and I went down to number 3 and 4 lean-to, hit the trail, and then hiked all the way around. And I came up, and I'll never forget it. It was dark. It was lightly snowing, and I was coming up this ridge to Moose Pond lean-to. And I can show you on the map where it is. and there was a glow. And I'm like, oh, somebody's there, which was good and bad, because usually on a hiking trail, they're going to be hikers, they're not going to be hunters. So I walked up to the lean-to, and there was about 6 to 7 people there. And I'm like, oh, this is not good. So they were cooking cornbread and chili. This is the best part of it. And I, weaseled my way in the lean-to. I sat down, took my pack off. I had put my gun around the backside of the lean-to because I didn't want to freak them out. That gun right there. And I sat down my pack, took it off. And this guy, he comes over and he sits right side of me. And he starts talking to me and he goes, basically, how long you been here? I said, oh, this is the 3rd or 4th night. What do you drink? He goes, I said, water. Where do you get it? I said, out of the brook. He's like, oh, all right. So, and I've got no food. And finally, the guy who turned out to be the leader of the group, and it was a group of students from, I think, Syracuse University. And this was like an annual ritual that they would hike into this lean-to. So he goes, you want some cornbread and chili? I'm like, duh. So 5-10 minutes later, I'm, thinking I'm going to starve to death. I'm eating cornbread and chili. I'm like in heaven. So what happened was there was one guy that wasn't part of the group, and I didn't know that until the next morning. So the next morning I get up and I'm putting my wet socks back on, and this guy that wasn't part of the group goes, you don't have any socks? And I go, no. He goes, do you want some? I'm like, sure. So he gives me a pair of socks. And then he explains to me that he's not part of the group and he's hiking out that morning, and if he can hike with me. I'm like, yeah, I don't. It's a trail. I'm not going to take it. We didn't get 50 yards from the lean-to, and he stops, he turns around, he looks me in the eye, and he goes, you got no food, no clothes, but your pack looks like it's going to explode. What is in there? I go, a bear. You shot that bear with that 22? And I'm like, no, it's a 30-06. And he was kind of limping, and I said, what'd you do, hurt yourself? And he goes, yeah, I sprung something. And I said, well, come with me, because I knew he was going to walk all the way to the trailhead. And it's on the Northfield Lake Placid Trail, and it's at the trailhead is actually the end of the Northfield Lake Placid Trail. And from that Moose Pond lean-to to that thing, I mean, you can look it up, but it's 6 or 8 miles. But I had figured out about halfway a way to bushwhack down to the Averville Road. And then I would park there and I'd bushwhack up and hit the trail. So I said, why don't you come with me and, I'll help you so you don't have to walk the rest of the way. But yeah, that would have been the 3rd or 4th night, I think, just for that goofy thing.
You, when you went into the woods and you were going to camp, how much food did you bring with you, or did you bring any at all?
It did vary from time to time. I've tried everything. And I've even tried, those little mini burners to heat water and dehydrated food. I mean, that's the best thing, because I wouldn't build a fire. I mean, occasionally, but rarely build a fire.
Before you go too far, why wouldn't you build a fire?
2 reasons. This material hates sparks. My sleeping bag is Gore-Tex and down. Expensive. And if you've ever built a fire with soft wood, you know that you're going to end up with burn marks all over you. So I didn't really, and I also have a Gore-Tex liner to double the waterproofing. I didn't want any of that. Those materials were not very good around fires. And 2, I didn't want to smoke. And 3, it took too much time and energy. Mm-hmm. Because I tried to spend the night with that deer with absolutely nothing. That was when I said I found that chain. One morning I got up and I had put up like a half-assed tent with a piece of plastic about 3 or 4 miles from that was my base camp. So one morning I got up and I said, I'm going to travel light today and I'm going to travel far. And I took off and got into a valley and picked up a track, went over the top, down the other side into this other valley. And that's where I found that chain and that other stuff. Well, on the back out, it started to snow really, really hard. So I said, I got to get out of here, because if it covers up my backtrack, I ain't never going to find my way. So I bust back and I bust out right where I picked up the track, and there's a little 4-pointer standing right there looking at me. I'm like, no, dude, it ain't happening. It just ain't going to happen. I appreciate the offer, but it ain't happening. So then I started walking through some hardwood down through, and I jumped another buck, and he's running up through, and he was a decent buck. But there again, I'm like, no, it ain't happening. My focus right now is to get back. Well, then I came to a point where I had a decision to make. I could cut through this big swamp, which was shorter, but I had to get through there before dark set in, or I'd be in big trouble, or I could walk all the way around through the hardwoods. So being lazy, I said, no, I'm going to take the shortest route. Well, I got down in this swamp, and I stood right in a deer bed with absolutely no tracks going into it. And I'm like, whoa, this thing is smoking hot. And he rubbed on some brush, nothing big. I said, well, he's kind of going my way, but it wouldn't have mattered. I'm going to follow him anyways. And within 15 minutes, I walk up on this guy. He runs away, turns, and makes the fatal decision to stop. And so I leveled him. And I walk over to him. I'm like, well, normally I'd be kind of happy. But right now I'm not too thrilled. So now darkness is setting in fast. And I'm like, uh-oh. Well, if you've ever been in that situation and you think you're going to build a fire and spend the night, I can tell you this area was covered up with firewood when it was light out. When it got dark, I couldn't find a piece to burn to save my life. And that softwood burns fast out in the open. So I'd been there about an hour realizing that I had nothing. I mean, I had lightweight boots, no coat. No, I mean, I was in trouble. I could have left the deer, but who knows what it would have been when I got back. So I had this little tiny flashlight. So I said, well, I'm going to walk down to Moose Pond because when it's dark out, I'm sure you've been in the woods when it's dark. You can't see nothing. I said, if I get down to the pond and walk the edge of the pond, because there's no trees, there'll be a little light and I can navigate. And I know the pond well enough to know that there's a brook coming in, into it. And if I reach my hand in and tell which way the water's flowing, I'll know it's that brook. And then I can turn left and come up to the lean-to. That same Moose Pond lean-to. So I start walking out through the woods with my flashlight. I get about halfway and the light goes out. I'm like, well, ain't this sweet? So I turn around, the fire's still going. So I walk all the way back to the fire, but I'm back at square one. And then I'm like, I'm fiddling with the flashlight. It comes back on again. I'm like, great, good to go, right? No. Get about the same distance, goes out again. I'm like, well, I'm committed now. This is ridiculous. So I waddle down to the beaver dam. If you've ever walked the edge of a beaver dam with the alders at night carrying a rack of antlers and a bunch of meat, it's not fun. So I finally maneuver around. I find a brook. I stick my hand in it. I'm like, yeah, it's flowing into the pond. Turn, walked up the bank, and there's the lean-to. And I had about a 2.5 second smile on my face because I'm like, well, what good is this going to do you? If you think it's hard to find firewood in the woods, try it around one of them lean-tos. There is
Everybody's picked over.
So I'm like, well, this is great, but at least there's a trail. Luckily, I had lightweight boots on. I could actually feel the trail through my boots because it would be packed down. When I step off the trail, I could feel it, being soft. And if I got really confused, my light would work for like a few seconds, so I'd turn it on. Oh, yeah, back on trail. When I finally got back to this makeshift tent, I was sick as a dog. Just sick. And woke up real late the next day and was actually kind of surprised. I thought I'd have to stay another day just to recuperate to come out. But I did make it out the next day. And those are the things that you keep logging in your mind. And next year comes along, you're like, have you forgotten? Are you really that slow? So that's why after a while you just can't. But I've seen some really big deer back in there.
Do you feel as though you hunt better when you have less food? Do you feel as though when you're hungry? Do you feel as though you hunt? No,
not at all. No, that because I'm not hunting the deer for food. No, I've tried that. Don't get me wrong. I tried that once, and I can tell you when you're that tired, and you try cooking venison and then eating it, it doesn't taste anywhere near as good when Grandma makes it. I'm telling you, it will turn your stomach. You know what I mean? When they say, "Oh, it's really fresh, it'll taste really good." Well, maybe if somebody that knows how to cook, but no. I've even tried sticks over a fire after a shot of deer. No. I mean, maybe if you're accustomed to eating raw meat or cooked meat, freshly killed, and nothing else, you might warm up to it. And after 3 or 4 days, I'm probably, you'd be more than warmed up to it. You'd be thrilled to death. But I always knew I had an exit. I mean, it would take, a number of hours, but I always knew I could walk out. So I never, but far as food, I got really good at eating those power bars, those flat power bars. I like those. But no, and like I say, those type of hunts, 4 nights is about all you can stand.
Yeah. And then you start talking to yourself.
Yeah. And actually, I still regret this one. I was back in there, and this time I was in the lean-to. I didn't even have this. And those are the worst, by the way. I'd rather sleep here than in a lean-to. Lean-tos are rock hard. There's really no protection. So it's cold.
Yeah.
And you'd get up in the morning, put your boots on. And at that time, I was wearing the boots with the rubber bottoms, the leather tops, so I could untie them, and with the thin felt liner, so I could sleep with my clothes in the sleeping bag to dry them out.
So a lot of these people that don't realize that, you take your clothes off and stick them in the bottom of the bag.
No. The setup is you have a sleeping bag. Mine is a expensive Gore-Tex bag, and the reason it's Gore-Tex. And then you have a self-inflatable or any mattress, but you always use the 3/4 one, the shortest, because your weight is everything. And all you really do is it supports your body from your knees up to your shoulders. Then you put all that inside of a Gore-Tex bivy, which is nothing more than a bag. About the same, it's the exact same shape as your sleeping bag, but a little bit bigger. That is for 2 reasons. Extra protection, but it keeps your pad from sliding out from underneath you, so it keeps it contained. But that's where you put your clothes. So your clothes, which are usually always wet, are between 2 layers of Gore-Tex. The water in your clothes can't seep down into your down feathers, because that would be a disaster. And hopefully you're radiating enough heat for the water to vaporize and be pushed up through that top layer of Gore-Tex. Does it happen like that all the time? No. Normally what happens is your clothes, and there'll be a line of frost on the bottom of that outer bivy bag. But at least they're warm. But yeah, you'd have to walk probably 100 yards for your boots to soften up enough so that you could tie the laces. And I did that one year and got down in this, just what you dream for as a hunter. There were deer tracks everywhere. And I'm on my hands and knees. It's real deep, powdery snow. I mean, everything's perfect. But it was like the second or third night I've been doing it. And I popped up in a beaver dam that had been drained. And this deer is walking right through the beaver dam. And I remember standing there going, my God, it's a mule deer. Because we were also hunting in Montana during that time. I'm like, well, no, idiot. You're in New York. Well, I must have done something, moved, talking to myself, whatever. Well, the deer stopped, turned, looked right at me. I'm like, oh, God, that's a big deer. So I picked up, because I've shot this one and that one. I shot them both right in the throats. So I said, well, I'll just do it again. No. Pulled the trigger and nothing happened. The deer's like, nice try, And I was stunned because I'd gotten kind of arrogant or confident or just, I don't know what it was. So I didn't even reload because I figured he was just going to drop like a stone. Well, he didn't. And of course, when I reloaded, he turned and ran. And even when he ran, I was like, boy, you are stupid. You're running right straight away. You're not going to make it. Well, I still can see the crosshair as the bullet went off going right between his antlers, the bullet. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You know how you can tell if you don't shut your eyes when it goes off, you see that little flicker of flame. So I knew I missed the second time. So I was a little discouraged, but, he seems dumber than me, so who knows? So I followed him down this creek. He came out, popped out in this only place you could see anywhere. And there was one spruce tree about the distance that Brent is from me there. And I'm standing behind it, looking around. The whole time, this buck's walking right straight for me. I didn't know it. And all of a sudden, I figured I'd seen everything there was to see, and I took a step and I turned, and he came out from behind that tree, and he wasn't 15 yards. And I don't even remember if I shot, to be honest with you. I just know at that point a switch went off and I was done. it was over. In hindsight, if I'd had a little more fortitude, I'm pretty sure I could have killed that deer. But that was it. I knew I had just enough in reserve to get out of there. So I just left. I just went back, walked back to the lean-to, packed up my stuff, and just walked out. I just could not physically do it anymore.
Yeah. Wow.
So
That's
it's
unbelievable.
Yeah. And I had another one that I got to the truck and tears were running out of my eyes. I shot one in Giant Mountains, as a matter of fact. Back at that lean-to, I'd hike. I'd watch the weather, and if it looked like it was going to snow, I'd take off and hike in, because it was easier walking when there wasn't any snow. Well, I got way back in there, and it dumped snow bad. But I got up in the morning out of my sleeping bag, walked up to the mountain, got up, picked up a track that was going down the mountain. I didn't go very far. I looked down. He was down there in his bed, and I shot him. I dragged him down to the trail, which was completely filled in with about 1.5 feet of snow. Went back up to the lean-to, grabbed my stuff, came down, packed him all up. And the pack was so heavy that you don't take it off. You just sit on a rock with it on your back. And you can't even put it on. You set it on the rock, and then you slide into it. Well, I had to break trail from there with that pack all the way back to the truck. And I remember telling myself about every third time my leg cramps, if I ever get out of here, I will never, ever come back here again. And I don't think I did. It was one of those deals, when you're all alone, you talk to the big guy, and you're like, dude, get me out of here, and I won't come back. I swear to God, I won't.
Promise.
And I did. I remember tears were just starting. I was like so physically exhausted that I just, wasn't. But it works. I will tell you, if you want to shoot deer in the Adirondacks, and if you want to do it consistently, it will work. But you're gonna, but I will tell you, it's easier now than it used to be, because the gear available is so much better. Even though I had the best sleeping bag, even today, that would be as good as you can get. The air mattresses are better today, but the clothing, Kuiu, I wear that stuff all the time now. That stuff is utterly amazing. More so because it's lightweight, but you can ventilate it. Because the way I hunt is I go really, really fast until I'm into deer, then I stop. And if I'm overdressed, I sweat and get tired out with heavy clothing. If I'm too light, I can't slow down enough when I get to where the deer are. So with the Kuiu stuff, you got so much ventilation in the pants and stuff, and they're so lightweight. And so you can travel really, really fast and cover a lot of ground. And then when you get to where you think your odds are, improved, I pull the zippers back up, bring the straps back in, and I'll usually carry. My hands are my weak link. Sometimes I carry the down mittens, usually just on one hand, and then it allows me to go from 100 down to 2 miles an hour, and then that's where the binoculars come in, and the safari sling. Why guys aren't doing the binoculars and the safari slings, I don't even know why. Especially tracking. Everybody's, oh no, not for no bullshit. Unless you have a death wish and you just want to keep jumping them and you want to keep throwing lead, if that's what you're into, then knock yourself out. But if you want to track a deer and you want to kill it with the least amount of effort, you're fooling yourself if you're not using binoculars and the safari sling. Because if they're not readily available and you can use them anytime you want with little or no effort, you won't use them. I see guys with them in their pocket. I can tell you right now, if I did that, I would never, ever use them. Mine are right here. I have 2 different setups, and I spent a lot of money on binoculars, and they're right here. And I can pick them up. And with the safari sling, all I have to do is drop, and I'm up.
Yep.
And
are you shooting a scope gun or?
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
More so to pick a hole through and that's where the binoculars come in. I would much rather shoot them standing still or in their beds. The absolute perfect hunt from the road was in the Corey's Road. Of course, there again, you still have to follow the deer for the knowledge and the wisdom. where they go, how they go, where they sleep, what they eat, all that stuff. And Benoit's books are great, by the way. They are absolutely phenomenal. Everything in those books is absolutely correct. And what I would do is I'd go into these areas and I would slab these mountains halfway up, looking for a track. Once I took a track, I would turn and then follow it. And because I knew the Adirondacks, because I knew the deer, at that point, every 20, 50, whatever, depending on the terrain, I was constantly searching. And I shot another buck in a blowdown, following him, caught up to him. If it hadn't been for the binoculars, absolutely. Because I knew the buck was there with the binoculars. I'd put the binoculars down. I could not see that buck. And I knew he was there because he was in a blowdown. And I'd pick it up. I know he's there. Even with my scope, I couldn't find him. But after a while, with the binoculars, especially, and they have to be good. If they're not good, don't waste your money. If they have to be really, really good binoculars.
What power do you like?
8. Well, they're right there. They're the Jaworski 8 to 40, 42s or whatever.
Yep.
And I have Zeiss too, which are good, but the Jaworskis are a lot better.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've shot deer in their beds, same way. When you get to an area where they think there's deer, because I got sick of jumping them. You know, in the Adirondacks, you have to walk enough. You want to get them on the first time. You don't want to have to jump them. And like I said, over there, they can go from mountain range to mountain range. And one mountain's bad enough. 2 is insanity.
Wear you out quick.
Yeah, wear you out quick. Because once they're on the ground, you got to get back.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So the binoculars are, and there again, once you start working with them, you look at that area, that 20, 30 feet that you can't see. You know what I mean? You don't look where you can see, and you look where you can't see. And then when you focus them in, it literally is. I mean, I read it in magazines when I was younger, and I was like, that's so stupid. I mean, that's great out west, but I don't need that. I'm shooting my deer at 30, 40, 50, 60 yards, 100 yards. Why do I need those things? Well, it's still relevant because that's as far as you can see. And if your vision is obstructed by distance or trees, it's still obstructed.
Yeah.
So, and I'm telling you, I've shot another buck right in his bed, came to an area, was all tracked up, had scrapes. I knew he was right there somewhere. It was on the top. That's where they liked. So I just stood there and I just kept looking and looking and looking and looking. Finally, I caught something that didn't look right. I kept looking at it and looking at it and looking at it. Finally, it moved. I'm like, oh, shit, it's a deer. And then you're laser focused on it. And then you slowly start picking out stuff. You're like, oh, there's an ear, there's an eye. Oh, that's an antler, right where it's supposed to be. But if you look at them long enough, they will move. And as they move, of course, your picture changes. And then you can start picking out the antlers.
The quality, is it because it if they're not a good quality, everything gets blurry?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, you need that clarity because you're looking at that area, you can't see anything.
Yeah.
In that area, I mean, you're trying to pick out small stuff, an eye, an ear flicker. I can tell you at least 3 buck I would never have shot without the binoculars. One was in his bed on bare ground. One was that one I was telling you about that I slabbed him out and caught him with that. You just and another benefit is, and this sounds a little arrogant, but I don't want to shoot a small deer. And the problem I've had in times where I've tracked them, the longer I track them, the bigger the deer gets. He may have started out a 4-pointer, but by the time after 3 or 4 miles, he's growing a point every mile. and I've literally told myself, you don't shoot this deer until you know what it is. And I failed. After about, 3, 4, 5 hours or whatever, this deer jumping, making an absolute fool out of you. Now it's like revenge. And I've literally shot them, brought the gun up and shot. And the whole time, every alarm in my head is going off going, no, don't do this. And I'm like, but it's just, it's like reverse buck fever, I guess. It's like, and you want it to be big. And the further you're in the woods, your imagination runs away. And I said earlier, that was another reason. I was so far back in, there were no hunters. There had to be a Boone and Crockett behind every tree. Oh, no. No, there just isn't. there isn't. I probably walked by more bigger buck when I left the truck than there's back in there. I ran into a guy back in there one day. His name was Alan Fishman. He was from New York City. Unbelievable guy. And I'm not saying that in necessarily a good or bad way, but he was just obsessed with getting an Adirondack buck. When I ran into him, I was back in Ward Brook, which was good 5-6 miles. He had a heavy pack on and 2 of those buckets that, you get drywall in. And he would walk, drop the bucket, go back, get another one, kind of leapfrogging down. I'm like, dude, you're never going to get there at this rate. So I helped him. We started talking, and he was something else, this guy. He had 2 goals in life: to catch a big brook trout and to shoot an Adirondack buck. Occasionally he'd call me and he'd go, I walked way back in the mountain pond. All I saw was this tiny little deer track. I'm like, yeah? Just because you're back in there doesn't mean they're big deer. You still got to go up into the stuff. Because he tried hunting out of a tree stand back in there, and I'm like,
be waiting a long time.
yeah, like eternity. Eternity. No, it's
that Vermont buck in the corner there. That's a pretty good buck.
Yeah, it was 204. Oh, actually, that was a decent tracking story. It involves my brother-in-law, Randy Farrell. We had gone to Alaska that year hunting, and we came back, and he wanted to go deer hunting in Vermont. So I said, all right, meet me. And the first day there was snow, and this was up in Newton Valley, and I picked up a decent track, and I followed, and I know that area really, really well. So I followed him. I knew where he was going. I made a big loop all the way around him, and I came back and never caught his track again. So I knew he was in that circle. But by the time I got back to the track, it was too late, and I didn't really want to go up in there the first day, and because I knew he'd end up getting shot, and that's why I kind of gave up on Vermont. So the next day, we went up in from another direction and went up over the top down the other side. Well, we picked up 4 or 5 tracks, and we're following. We're down over the mountain on the other side, and he was with me. And I said, what are we doing following these deer? They're dull doe. This is insane. I said, and we're not that far from where I left that buck yesterday. I mean, I'm probably not going to be there, but let's, better than nothing. We had nowhere said that and turned that way and started walking, and he was coming right out of where I left him and heading right straight for me. I shot him the first time, and I thought I missed, and the next time I shot him here to the buffalo head. He was dead that time. But, yeah, that was kind of a tracking, but, if you're tracking in an area where there's a lot of hunters, you might be a little careful, because I've done Vermont a lot of times where somebody else would shoot them. If it's somebody you like and that's one thing, and if it's a couple days into it, it's not quite as exciting.
No, definitely not.
The only way I justify it is, good dragging, bud.
Yeah.
Gotta go.
Go.
I know a guy that was hunting that area last year, opening weekend, and he said that there was 14 trucks down at the bottom of the road.
It's gotten insane, that area.
Pretty crazy.
All of Vermont's like that.
Yeah.
And Vermont's gotten really, really bad, as far as I'm concerned, because of the moose. When I was younger, the tops of the mountains were the sanctuaries for bucks, and especially the bigger bucks. And because, like I say, the whole doe thing. And then the moose came in, and I went back to areas that I'd hunted as a younger person, and it's like a park. I mean, the browse from ground to 4 feet is gone. I mean, you can look, you could get longer shots up there than you could get on a meadow in some places. Mm-hmm. So that forced a lot of the deer down. And then as more people moved in, they improved their land by clearing apple trees, by mowing. And then on top of that, there's a lot of feeding going on, either direct or indirect. Food plots are just literally, and I'm guilty of it too. I mean, I fed the deer not to shoot them, but, they're fun to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And it got so bad, we were buying those freaking monster soybean bales, and your mind's telling you really shouldn't do this, you really shouldn't do this, and you really shouldn't, because you're really making matters worse, because they're going to be dependent on you forever, and when you stop being dependent, it's going to create a disaster. So I kind of weaned off from that. But any decent buck we used to get in Vermont would end up dead, usually first or second day.
Yep. You got another one in here somewhere that's Vermont too, right?
Yeah, that one's 232. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Same area?
Yep. And actually that was, I left work. I was heading up to the top of Newton Valley. I was going to throw up a tree stand because I'd been in on the other side sleeping in the woods, and I'd caught a glimpse of him up on this side mountain. I said, well, I'll sneak around the back, get up on top. I'll throw up a tree stand, which I do it all the time, and I never sit in them. And as I got up there, the snow started coming from Montgomery, and it was picking me in the face, and it was bare ground. And I said, well, that's good, And I said, I'm sure he's probably still on this side. So I popped down over, and I didn't have binoculars. All I had my scope. I leaned up against a tree, and I'd take my scope, and I'd just keep making bigger circles. And I spotted a doe. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that's probably that same doe he's been hanging around with. So I kept doing the circle, repeat, doing it again. And finally I caught movement of he was chewing his cud. And whoa. And so I said, oh, okay. So there again, I just kept focusing on it. And I finally picked out his body, and I just shot, and he never even got up. He's over there and just flattened him right there. And I left him because I was on the other side. So I came over the other side, got a bunch of buddies, and we went up around the other side and pulled him out. But yeah, I think we won 3 buck pools with him. We won the one in Underhill, Heinsberg, and there was another one. It just so happened one of my employees that year was like, oh, give me money. I'll sign you up for the buck pools down around Starksboro area, because that's how I was in there's a big one down there somewhere at one of the grocery stores. I don't know. I should have won both guns. They had a gun for the heaviest deer and most points. But they decided that one was enough. Right for
You couldn't have both.
We're gonna have both.
There's been a lot of local buck pools, one with bucks from Eden, Belvedere.
Yeah.
Back in the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was some big deer up there years gone by.
They don't shoot them really anymore.
No, because they're not there.
Yeah.
No, they can't. That sanctuary's gone.
There used to be a family from that Belvedere area that would win the local buck pool pretty much every year.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They shot some nice ones.
Yeah, it was they either came out of there or the Northeast Kingdom. There was a family that had some access up around the border. I know your father knows them. I can't remember the Tallmans.
Yeah.
Yeah, they used to supposedly, and there again, this is hearsay and I have no proof, but they had access, I guess, back into some areas that most people didn't, or if they did, they had to walk. That's what I was told. When it comes to deer hunts like fishing, you got to believe half of what you hear.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's for sure.
So
nope, that family has definitely killed some big ones. Mm-hmm. Yep, the old one.
Because I'm pretty sure their deer that year was pretty close to this one, if I remember right. And actually, my father won a buck pool with one that was 2-something in Underhill.
Yep.
Shot that in the pouring rain down on the lower side of the road. And that's when he got in 1955, not too far. That's a Belvedere buck, too.
Yeah. Huh.
But no, sucks to get old.
You're in good shape. Yeah. I'm telling you.
Yeah, you sure are.
You've done well. You killed some nice deer.
So why the draw to the Adirondacks? Just because it's bigger ground, less people?
The simple belief that if there were no hunters and it was big woods, there had to be big deer. That simple. Yeah. And for me, just like there's different regions of the Adirondacks, there's different reasons for hunting. For me, hunting has to be an adventure. I can afford to hunt anywhere I want to go. And if all I was after was big racks, would I be in the Adirondacks? Not hardly. I wouldn't even drive over there if I was after big deer. I'd be on a plane or, somewhere there. But I just can't bring myself, even if it was free, even if they were paying me, I couldn't fly to a Saskatchewan and, get carted out and thrown in a blind and said, to me, now everybody's entitled to their own opinions. That's not the hunting I want to do. It has to involved some sort of an adventure, almost like a thrill-seeking type thing. You know, whether it was navigating the Lake of the Woods in the pitch dark, you know, around the islands and the rocks, and occasionally running ashore. That was part of it. Even the drive out was part of it. As silly as it's saying, you're stuck in a truck with 2 or 3 other people of the same intelligence of you, and that's a low bar, by the way. And so your conversations are as primitive as they get, and that's what you like. Now 26 might be a little too long, but and there again, getting up every morning, jumping in the boat, you know, navigating out there. I can remember one year we successfully navigated out to this bay, and it's still dark. We jump off onto shore, the 2 or 3 of us, and the sun comes up. And you're looking over, watching the sun come up over the Lake of the Woods, you know, that blue water, the islands. And I remember saying to those guys, this is what it's about, you know, because I can honestly tell you those are pretty much all recent deer down there. And I bet you every one of them, when I walked up to them, the words that were uttered were, "What an F have you done?" Because it was like, oh, 1, it's over. 2, you're faced with this task that, like Murphy's Law, always comes when you least want it. You're either dead tired, soaking wet, or in the worst hellhole you've ever been in. And then reality strikes, because you know how far the boat is. You know how far the truck is, or the trail. And you're like, damn. You know, like that one down near the wider one that I shot a couple of years ago. I mean, it's literally pouring rain. And I'm wearing that poncho. So I tried to string it up to give me shelter to try to, you know, skin this thing out. And if you think you can't keep dry walking through the woods, try keeping dry bending over, skinning a deer out. It ain't going to happen. So now you've got this excess weight, and you've got to get to the boat. And then you got to hope when you get to the boat that it starts, you can find it. The wind on the lake isn't producing, you know, 3 or 4 foot waves, because all these things have happened. I've come out of these channels and the lake is like, oh my God, I'm sure the Titanic is around here somewhere. So and that's another thing with that particular motor. I can run in such shallow water. What I do is I run right along the edge. And this only for the simple reason that if I capsize, I don't have far to go. Which is good and bad, because usually the waves are a little, you know, worse right there. But there again, at least I can jump off and probably just stand in the water versus try to swim. I remember one time, I think I even took photographs. I unloaded the boat. I had the little 2.2 Mercury outboard, went up the river, got to the lake, went all the way across the lake. Now I'm an hour and a half into this adventure, and I came to the bay and there's ice, probably 75 feet of ice from shore. And I'm like, ain't happening. I'm not turning around. So it's like, got the boat, flung it up on shore, tied it off. I didn't get 20 feet from the boat and I hear this racket. I'm like, the hell? And of course I'm worried about the propeller, like I mentioned earlier, freezing in the housing, and then I'm losing my cooling on the outboard. But it's even worse than that. And I said, I better go back. I went back and my boat had slid right back down to the shore. Now, at that particular time, it didn't seem like a big deal because there was still ice. It wouldn't have gone anywhere. So I said, oh, Jesus. So I pulled it way up on shore, tied it up. Well, I went hunting all day. And while I was hunting on top, I noticed there was a lot of wind coming from the direction I didn't really want it to come from. So I get bound to my boat, and it's like 1 foot to 2 feet of ice. All that ice that was in the water is now up on shore. But that ain't the worst part. All the waves that push that ice on shore are still there. So now you put your boat out in the water and you're in shallow water and you can't drop your outboard because it's not deep enough. So you try to row out where the water's deep enough. Now you got to try to start this motor as fast as you can before you get pushed back into shore. And then if you do make all that and you start motoring, all you do is focus on that little spittoon where the water comes out on an outboard. You're like staring at that thing. And because there's one place there was a major river coming in that I had no way back to the truck unless I went past that point on the lake. And I remember going, looking. I'm like, oh, Lord. And that was another time I was like, dude, get me out of here. I'll never come back. Sure enough, you see it drip, drip, and you're like, good to go, right? And then you get back to your thing, and then I went and bought that one because that one is air cooled. I don't have to worry about that. I can run that thing right in the sand.
Yeah.
And it's a Honda, so pretty dependable. So I absolutely love it.
Get you anywhere you want to go.
Right, get you. But that doesn't mean you still can't be totally stupid because it won't cut ice. It's not an icebreaker. Yeah, because my brother-in-law and I were out in Ontario. The last year we went out there, and got out of the boat and probably shouldn't have. Went hunting, came back, and this thing was frozen in bad. I mean, bad. And we're breaking ice, trying to get out to open water. And my brother-in-law, God love him, but he uses his outboard for a tiller, a rototiller, because he's up front, driving the boat. And I'm in the back, and mud and dirt and stones are coming up. And I'm like, you might want to raise that thing up, dude. I'm thinking, it's your boat, your motor, but I'd like that propeller still to spin for another couple hundred miles.
Shears the pin.
Yeah, shears the pin, or worse yet, plugs the, and that's how you plug the thing up because it sucks dirt up in there. But, luckily but that area's gone down the tubes too. The hunters, the wolves, especially the wolves, but yeah.
Well,
so I don't know. Where's everybody hunting now? Any ideas? Last year was a disaster. So many guys were hunting all these areas in the Adirondacks. It's truly, and even in that northern region by Paul Smith, the amount of trail cameras in the woods now is off the charts. It's literally off the charts.
Wow.
Trail cameras.
Well, are they cell cams or are they?
Some are, some aren't.
Yep. Yep.
They don't use as many because there's not that good of a cell signal. But see, the other problem is Paul Smith's College. They do a lot of research and stuff. And I ran into a guy, I think it was the grouse guy, and he said how many cameras they have because they would find like a carcass and they would throw cameras up on it. Because he's got a couple pictures, and one of the things he goes, look at this picture. He goes, what's that? I said, well, it's a coyote on a dead deer. He says, what's this one? Ooh. I said, it looks like a wolf on a dead deer. He goes, yeah, that's what I say too. But Fish and Game says it's coyote. But I wish you could see this picture because I've seen, being in Ontario and Saskatchewan, I've seen wolves right up close. And I agreed with him. If it was a coyote, it was the biggest, oddest color coyote on the planet. But see, Paul Smith does a lot of research. So they're doing a lot of moose research over there right now because they're scared to death the moose are going to come in there. I'm baffled why they don't, because that is prime moose country, especially the way they log it. They go in a clear cut, and then about 2 years later, there is more moose browse than you could shake a stick at. Now, there are definitely more moose over there than there used to be, but they are really, really nervous that.
What do you mean? They're just nervous that the population is going to explode? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's gonna if they don't have a season on them, and if they're cutting.
Yeah,
I know the locals over
everybody
there.
is stunned that it hasn't happened already. Of course, Lake Champlain and the St. Lawrence are pretty good boundaries for fencing.
Yeah, and
that's the only thing that's keeping them at bay. And there are moose there now. I've seen them more than I ever had, especially the sign. But I don't know how well they'll populate the area. But the only thing that's missing in that northern region is they don't have, like Vermont and the high peaks have, or that softwood on the top, because that's where they winter, up on the tops. So I don't know if that's holding them back, but I don't think so.
They lose that softwood up top, you'll see that population decline big time. If they don't have cutting anywhere else. Yeah. They'll the same thing that happened in the greens. They'll just eat themselves out of habitat. And it'll forever be a field on top, just like what you were describing, where you used to find those bucks.
Yeah, not anymore.
Yep. Well, this has been a very good podcast. We
really has.
We greatly appreciate you getting on.
Yeah. I always like deer hunting. I wish I didn't have so many true stories because then I could lie more. Because my imagination is better than reality, just so you know.
All right, we're going to end this until the next time. Thanks, guys.